This week on Painting Lines.
You win this point, the match is over. If you don't win that point, you might play for another 2 hours.
You have two players at different points in their careers, like on the increasing slope, Draper, like heading up, and then Stefanos kind of trending downwards, and they're just meeting in that point. It's an extra bonus to be able to say, this guy has never smashed a racket or lost his cool on the court.
Welcome to the Painting Lines podcast, your one-stop shop for all things tennis. Join Erik and Aidan in their discussion for updates on news and pop culture, and from hot takes to betting, they've got you covered.
Ready? Play.
Welcome back to Painting Lines. Last week we recapped a pretty interesting Canadian Masters, and now we're heading down to Cincinnati to break down this jam-packed week. But before we jump in, I want to give a little background on the Cincinnati tournament because it's pretty interesting history, and I was looking more into it. So this is going to be its 125th year running, which is the longest tenured tennis tournament in the world. It was actually bought by BMO Capital and kept in Cincinnati for the next 25 years because before there was a lot of shakeup in the ATP, and Charlotte was actually one of the cities that was bidding for the tournament. But this private equity company purchased it and decided to keep it in Cincinnati, and they're investing 260 million into it over the next, so many years, which is good because it's gonna kind of turn into, I feel like, more of an Indian Wells than a Miami Open, because you know how Miami Open we were talking about players complaining a lot about the facilities and it just being like sprung up out of nowhere for 2 weeks, whereas this is going to be like a more permanent solution, which benefits the players ultimately. And like we mentioned before, this is now going to be a 2-week tournament starting next year, which is why I said jam-packed, because they're fitting a Masters 1000 into 1 week. And then something funny I just saw when I was watching was Chris Collinsworth was actually in the Cincinnati Open commercial, the Bengals legend, wide receiver, NFL commentator. So I feel like this tournament is trending in the right direction, and I'm excited for the future. I'm excited to break it down this week. So Aidan, I'll stop rambling now, but the defending champ won't be there to defend his title. What are your thoughts on Djokovic withdrawing?
Yeah, I mean, just before I get into that, I do think it's funny that you were comparing it to Indian Wells, because I agree it will be better to have that sort of consistent infrastructure for the tennis tournament. But it's also a funny comparison just because you're comparing like Cincinnati to Southern California, which I don't know if that lines up correctly, but it's definitely good that it'll have the infrastructure there so that players can have a great experience.
Taking some stabs at the Cincinnati folks, huh? Okay.
Yeah. In terms of Djokovic, I think it's just a tough situation for him now because it's like, what does he have left to prove? Like nothing. He's already done all of it. And at this point in his career, you look at a Masters 1000 tournament, and for most players, that's like, if you win a Masters 1000, that's like the pinnacle of your career. For Djokovic, you could argue that it doesn't even matter for his legacy at this point, and he doesn't need the money from playing in these tournaments. It's like, what's his motivation to go back out there and play in this tournament again? I mean, he'll definitely play in the US Open because if he won that, it would impact his legacy still. But him winning one more Cincinnati Masters is kind of meaningless to him at this point. So to me, I don't think it's that big of a deal for him. And I think it does just give an opportunity for other players to step up, which we saw this week.
Yeah, I agree. I really don't think it's a big deal for him. I just think for the tournament itself, like as far as interest goes, like anything that Djokovic is not playing in is immediately, you have one less great player to watch, which, it kind of takes away a little bit, especially if you're defending a title.
Yeah, he definitely has a massive draw, and it's a bummer for them that he isn't playing in it, but it's hard to convince him to play. Like, what are you going to give him? Oh, you're going to give him more money? He has plenty of money.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I guess there's really nothing to incentivize him.
Yeah.
Uh,
But you're to hop right into this?
Yeah, should we start with some first round upsets?
100%, 100%.
Dude, our boy Tommy Paul, what happened against Kaboli?
That's a tough one to swallow.
It's tough because he had 3 match points that he couldn't convert.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the toughest things to deal with in tennis in general is like when you have match points and you can't convert them, and then you have to keep playing. Like,
Hmm.
unlike other sports where it's like, oh, you're playing for a certain amount of time or a certain number of innings, for example. In tennis, it's like, okay, you get to this amount of points. Like, you win this point, the match is over. If you don't win that point, you might play for another 2 hours.
Yeah,
And that's something that you have to be able to deal with mentally. And it's really tough.
I know. I love the stats they'll pull up in a match. It'll be like their last match point was an hour and a half ago. It's
Mm,
like they basically played a full match in between then
yeah.
from when they could have been chilling in the locker room, showered up, ready to go out to dinner.
Exactly. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later because there were some other matches where there were some critical match points. But yeah, this was one that definitely was a bummer for Tommy Paul, especially because he was such a big favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not worried. Like this doesn't worry me going into the US Open because I'm still chalking it up to like that post-Olympics hangover where he's still kind of getting used to the surface.
Yeah, I agree. But also there's the element of like, okay, he's playing in a tournament this week, and then should he have maybe just not even played if he's going to have that hangover? I guess he wants to warm up for it,
Hmm.
but does it just give more fatigue? It's really tough. The Olympics does throw the whole tour for a loop.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I think another guy that got impacted was Fritz as well.
Yeah.
Losing to Nakashima, like,
Yeah.
come on. I
Then
mean,
again, Nakashima has been playing
yeah.
a lot better recently. I feel like he's a guy that kind of gained confidence by not playing in the Olympics in terms of like he played in other tournaments and did decently. And then he has got a couple wins in both Canada and Cincy. He's up near a career high ranking again. And I feel like he's kind of showing why he won the next gen finals a couple of years ago. Like he has that ability if he performs to his potential.
Yeah, I know. But you would think someone like Korda, who also didn't play the Olympics, would have that advantage too. But then he gets upset by Carino Busta. And this is all in the first round too. All three, the highest ranked Americans.
Yeah, I do feel a little bit confused about Corda just because he played so well last week, but then you almost have to say, is this because of that? Because we know that there was that weird crossover where Canada got delayed and they started playing on Monday. And so he definitely had a tough turnover, especially because he went so deep into that tournament. So maybe there's fatigue, not necessarily from the Olympics, but from playing in DC and then Canada and then Cincy, and it just sort of all runs together.
Yeah, and these players are going to have a week off between the U.S. Open. Like I doubt they're going to be playing in Winston-Salem. But anyway, I think this, losing in Cincinnati gives them just that extra half week or so, extra week and a half to prep for the US Open. And I don't know if that's necessarily better to have match play or practice play in there.
I think probably just better for him to have rest
Hmm.
in terms of how it benefits him,
Hmm.
because you do want to go into that tournament fresh if you want to make a deep run. Because like I've said in the past, in when we're talking about the slams, time on court becomes a major issue for a lot of players.
Yeah, especially getting into the slams. I'm ready for those five setters.
Exactly, exactly.
Someone else though in the first round. I don't know if you call this an upset or not, but Arnaldi did not consolidate his Montreal semifinal run. He loses to Echeverry, which I'm kind of glad. Um, Remember, I was talking about how much I didn't like Arnaldi last week. So
Yeah.
first round exit is not the worst thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably he was dealing with a similar thing to Corda in terms of the crossover, but also, like you were saying, this isn't really as much of an upset as the other ones because Arnaldi isn't a top 15 guy.
And I mean, this goes to show exactly what we were talking about last week. He makes the semifinal run, complete fluke. He loses first round this week.
Well, I mean, same thing happened with Popyrin, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
I
Yep.
don't know if it's
I mean,
it's
I said it. I said Popper was I was gearing more towards the fluke
yeah.
aspect.
I think it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it shows, like we've talked about how tennis is such a mental game. It's like when someone's just in the right headspace and they're
Hmm.
just playing to like their peak ability, they can beat anybody in the world. Like Popper, an incredible run last week. And then he comes out this week and maybe he's like, oh my gosh, now I have to just come into another tournament and try to perform at the same level I just did and then just immediately loses. It's tough to keep that consistently. And that's why the best guys in the world are so separated in terms of like the top five. It's like these guys are able to week in and week out play really near their peak ability.
Yeah, and I do think someone like Popyrin, who, and I said this last week, and I'm going to stand on this hill. This will probably be his only Masters 1000 title, and I think the fact that he won, like he's still enjoying it almost. Like he doesn't even care if he wins this tournament because he's already satisfied. Like this victory will carry him through at least the U.S. Open, I think. And like he's not expected to win the U.S. Open. For him, he's expected to make a few rounds and call it a day. It's like to him, this is, no worries, no harm done.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost a question of whether he should enjoy it because it's like if he doesn't think he'll win another one, should he be like, hey, I'm going to enjoy this now because this may be the pinnacle of my career.
And I think that's what it is. I think he's, not that upset that he lost. He didn't get to enjoy it. I feel like once you win a Masters and then you have to go and play another one, it's kind of like you're still processing everything
2 days later.
Yeah, literally. But how about we hop into the next round?
Sounds good. So the bigger seeds start coming out in the next round.
The bigger seeds, yeah. But then we got Dimitrov who gets headhunted by our boy.
Yeah. Marozsan, the Hungarian headhunter. I mean, that dude he's so fun because he shows up at tournaments and does stuff like this. But I feel like it's looking like you were right with what you said last week in terms of Dimitrov being on the decline again, because we talked about end of last year, beginning of this year, he was really playing incredible. Like he won a tournament. He made a couple Masters 1000 finals. And then all of a sudden he's kind of just losing earlier and earlier, back-to-back first round exits. We'll see how he does in the U.S. Open, but it's not looking that great for him in terms of his momentum.
Definitely. And as far as recaps, I feel like we like to kind of get into the upsets, especially early on in the tournament. But I just wanted to mention Tiafoe had a big win against Musetti here because Musetti's been playing very well. Tiafoe has not necessarily been playing that well. So I feel like this was a pretty notable thing to mention.
Yeah, and I think that it wasn't even that close of a match. Like Tiafoe won pretty solidly over him. And like you said, I mean, Musetti's been playing great. He obviously made the semifinal at Wimbledon. He made the final in Croatia, and then he won the bronze medal. So very solid performances. And then comes in here after his first tournament since the Olympics and doesn't really perform where he was prior. I mean, obviously different surface. And we've talked about maybe he's not quite at the same level as he is on other surfaces on hard court. But still, I agree. Big win for Tiafoe.
Yeah, and this is just part of that post-Olympic hangover. We're seeing it here too with Musetti.
100%. 100%. But speaking of a post-Olympic hangover, let's talk about Medvedev.
Jeez.
Yeah.
What's interesting here, so he loses to Lehecka, and Cincinnati, at the talk of the town right now is how fast this court is, because historically they're slowing down courts to make matches longer, give fans more of an experience to watch. But Cincinnati did the opposite. They sped the court up, and you would think Medvedev would excel here, but he doesn't. He loses.
Yeah, and it's just really weird because we know him as a hard court specialist. He himself he's called himself a hard court specialist.
Yeah.
And we get the return to hard court finally after the long clay season and then the short grass season and then the Olympics. And then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, this hard court specialist immediately loses first round twice in a row. Like, what is this? And I just think that's really not good for confidence going into the U.S. Open, where he was supposed to be one of the favorites.
Yeah, and that's his tournament. He's won the U.S. Open. It's his only slam.
Yeah, and he was a finalist last year.
Right. I mean, is it the ceiling? Has he reached his ceiling? Are players figuring him out? I don't know.
I mean, we talk about figuring him out. We can look at what Sinner did to him in Miami. That was, I think, a peak
Dismantled
example
him.
of saying, hey, I have your game completely figured out. There's
Mhm.
nothing you can do today. And Medvedev looked so lost in that match. And I wonder if people are now just looking at that match and being like, hey, if I need to prep for Medvedev, I need to do exactly what Sinner did in that match. And while other people can't necessarily hit the same shots that Sinner does as
Mhm.
consistently, it's like if they have a good day and they're able to sort of replicate what Sinner did, they can maybe beat Medvedev, not as handedly as Sinner when in Miami, but they can maybe beat him. Whereas before, they didn't really know what to do against him.
Yeah, wow, that's actually a great point. So you have a perfect example of a case study. Just go watch that Sinner match, right? If you can't replicate exactly what he did, you have a better idea of how to beat Medvedev. It's a masterclass of how to beat Medvedev.
Exactly.
Wow, good stuff. But Lehecka's a respectable loss. Like he's a younger guy, and I feel like we're gonna see a lot of Lehecka in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think he's a guy that a couple years down the line could be a problem for someone like Alcaraz or Sinner. But we'll see how he develops.
Yeah, well, we should stick on some upsets for round of 32 because there are a couple more. Jack Draper beating Stefanos Tsitsipas is an upset. Yes,
Yeah,
technically, right?
I feel like it's not. I mean, obviously there were bigger ones, and also it's like
Hmm.
when you look at this matchup, it's like you said, is it really an upset? It's a number 25 guy in the world beating the number 11 guy in the world. I
Hmm.
feel like it's almost a connotation upset, which is a new term. I just made it up, but
I love it.
it's like Draper. If we think back to 2021, let's say Draper isn't really like a known guy. Like he's not a big player, and Tsitsipas is like top 5 in the world, right?
Hmm.
And so in our heads, that's that perception of them, even though we know Draper's been having a great year and Stefanos hasn't really been having as great of a year, uh, that connotation of, oh, Draper is much lower ranked than Tsitsipas is still in our heads a little bit, when in reality, they're not that separated.
Yeah, and kind of going off that, I feel like you have two players at different points in their careers. Like you have on the increasing slope Draper, like heading up, and then Stefanos kind of trending downwards, and they're just meeting in that point. Whereas, like
Yeah.
if you have it before, it's like, all right, Stefanos is going to win. It's going to get closer and closer and closer. And now it's at that point where Draper overtook him.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's
Not
overtook him yet, but
no, but
I see what you're
yes,
saying in terms of
yes.
like Tsitsipas being like plateauing to going down slightly and Draper
Draper
on the
going up.
rise. Yeah.
Yeah. How about FAA and Rune? Would you consider that an upset? Like it's one of those technicalities, but
It's another one. I mean,
dude, he waxed him too.
FAA, yeah, he beat him pretty bad there.
Uh,
And it's funny because this actually brings the head-to-head 4-3 for Felix, and he's beaten him the last 3 times they've played now.
hmm.
But when I look at a matchup like this, I'm honestly like, I really expect very little from Rude at this point on anything outside of clay. Like
Damn.
we talked about it, like going into the clay season, we were like, Rude has not been playing very well. He plays really well in the clay season. And as much as we try to emphasize, okay, he's a clay specialist, we still
Hmm.
bring those expectations out of the clay season.
Yeah.
Like he'll have one good performance on something other than clay, and we'll be like, Rude's back. And
Yeah.
then he has a few bad performances, and we're like, oh, well, I guess we should have expected this because we were literally saying this earlier in the year. And I mean, then again, like FAA has also been playing very well recently.
Hmm.
So it's
I think
like,
it's
it's a combination of like Rude, we know is not the best player outside of clay right now. I mean,
yeah.
historically he's played in a US Open final, but recently he hasn't been that great of a player outside of clay. And FAA has been kind of regaining all of his confidence and been playing a lot better recently.
Definitely. I think I need to reassess my valuation of Rude being one of those players where he is so good that he'll perform on all surfaces. Like we said, he has past results, US Open finalist on hard court. He's not one of the guys that is like an Alcaraz or a Sinner where you can put him on any surface and they'll excel. Like now he's kind of trending towards pretty much just clay, which is unfortunate because he used to be one of those guys where you can put him on hard or clay and he would have good results.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about that is like it also, I feel like the reason players make sure their game is relatively balanced is because it does have a significant impact on like how you're able to maintain your ranking. Because for Rude, like he has so much pressure on his clay season now because if he doesn't perform like next year in the clay season, how has he performed in the rest of the year? Not that great. I mean, not absolutely terrible, but not great. Like he'll definitely fall down in the rankings if he does poorly in Monte Carlo and Barcelona next year. And it's like, yes, he is a great clay player, but I don't know if it's great to put all your eggs in one basket like that.
No, I agree. So do you think he should take a page out of Stefanos's book and fire his dad as a coach?
I don't know. I just think he should maybe hire someone else that
Bring someone
will,
on.
yeah, bring someone additional on that will help him develop his game on hard court and grass.
So what are your expectations for him going into US Open?
I
Would
wouldn't
you
be
like you wouldn't
shocked.
be surprised if
I
he
wouldn't be
early
shocked if he
exits?
lost in the second round.
Yeah.
But I would be honestly more shocked if we saw him in like the semifinal.
hmm I think it all depends on his draw too. Like he could have an easy draw, like you said, and make it to the semifinal, or he could be out in the second round.
100%. I mean, we've
Jeez.
seen
Hopefully he doesn't get
some weird
FAA in
draws.
this draw
Yeah.
because FAA's beaten him the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, FAA is on the reverse of last year. If FAA
Yeah.
lost in the first round now this year, I'd be like, oh, it is a shock.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. How about the biggest upset of the tournament?
Yeah, Monfils, what a man.
Monfils. Jeez.
Beating
I
Alcaraz is pretty crazy. I mean, you look at where Alcaraz has been in the last couple tournaments he played, won Wimbledon, won the French Open, finalist in the Olympics,
mhm.
and then comes in here and is beaten by Monfils. It's just insane. And to me, I really want to say that like this is why Monfils is still playing. Like moments like this are why you keep playing if you're a guy like him. Because first of all, this is his first win over Alcaraz. And that just gains him a little bit of bragging rights because he beat an Alcaraz who, I mean, unless Alcaraz takes another step up, this seems like a prime level Alcaraz. So, like, for the rest of his life, he'll be able to just be like, yeah, I mean, I beat a prime Alcaraz when I was 36 years old and way past my prime. So we'll talk about who's actually the best player of all time.
Yeah, but
Um,
is there an asterisk on this because of the rain delay? Like, can you say that confidently? Because I
yeah,
feel like you still didn't beat him straight up. Like he had a little bit of help with the weather and the circumstances.
he definitely had a little bit of help because the rain delay was a big factor. I mean, just because like Alcaraz had won that first set, they're going into that tie break and there's the rain delay, and Monfils able to come out fresh.
hmm
Obviously, a massive help when you're much older, and know that okay, I only have to win a tie break in one set,
Yeah.
which is all he really cares about. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Monfils said, "Hey, I'm going to like overextend myself in this match. I'm going to give everything. I don't care if I lose the next round.
hmm
I'm going to give everything I have. Like this is a final to win
Yeah.
this match."
Yeah.
And maybe Alcaraz is thinking, hey, I still have 4 more matches after this or whatever if he wins it. So I don't know. I doubt that played a role, but I do think that it definitely helped him. But when you look at the scoreline, it's one of those things where like, yes, right now there's an asterisk that we can talk about, but 3 years from now, no one's even going to remember the rain delay.
That's true. That is a very good point. And I remember when Monfils played him in Miami and he lost and there was a clip of him like running over to the stands or after a point and he just goes, he's too fast. I don't know what to do. He is too fast. And then for him to just go out, figure it out, I think he took the night and I really think he was planning, strategizing, making those adjustments. And like you said, just gave it his all. And On the other side of it, you have Alcaraz, who in the press conference was saying that this was the worst match he's ever played in his life. What do you what do you think on how much of an excuse Alcaraz is making about him playing poorly, or Monfils stepping up to the challenge and beating him, like playing better tennis than him?
I mean, you
A
could
little bit
see
of
that
both.
Alcaraz was frustrated with his game. I mean,
Hmm.
like Alcaraz has played tough matches in the past. Think of when he played Djokovic last year here in Cincinnati. Like he played that match. That was a close match. That was an intense one. He didn't explode the way that he did in this match, absolutely just demolishing his racket.
Yeah.
So I feel like that shows in terms of the frustration, just that like he was frustrated with how he was playing during the match. It wasn't just like an excuse after he lost.
Hmm.
Like I think probably even if he'd won the match, he still would have been like, I really played poorly today.
Yeah, I just think like this is a total Sasha Zverev move, going out in the press conference and just saying how poorly he played instead of saying how well Monfils played. But I mean, I think that's what it was. I think, you're not going to go out there even though you played terrible and give all the credit to the opponent, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people have that level of class, but I and not that I'm saying like Alcaraz doesn't have class, but
Uh,
I do think that he still has room to mature. We'll say that.
yeah. Well, let's stick on the racket smash here just for a second. I think this is a pivotal moment in his career because you have guys like Rafa and Roger, who people speak so highly of because of not only their talent on the court, but their class. And I don't think Rafa has ever smashed a racket in his career. I don't think I think that people like to mention that too when they talk about Rafa. And I think now this like you can't say Alcaraz has never smashed a racket on tour. And you have guys like Rude too. Like you've never seen Rude smash a racket. I feel like that's just something, it's an extra bonus to be able to say this guy has never smashed a racket or lost his cool on the court. And do you think this has any implication on his like standing? Obviously, he's going to be a great tennis player and win multiple slams, but does this have a negative impact on him? How people view him?
I mean, I think if it becomes a pattern, maybe. I
Mm,
think one time, nobody really cares.
yeah,
I
I thought
think
it was awesome.
if he does it like 15 times, people
Yeah,
are like, okay, he does have a little bit of a temper,
yeah. I
but
like
it
the
kind of does go with
passion.
yeah, it kind of goes with his personality. I feel like he shows more emotion. Like there's a difference between him and Sinner. Like there is a much more of an outpouring of emotions from Alcaraz, positive and negative. True, he hasn't really smashed rackets in the past, but I wasn't super shocked when I saw that he had.
Yeah, I think the emotion part, like why people like watching Alcaraz, because he looks like people say he brings that like kid energy onto the court. Like he just looks like he's having fun out there. That did not look fun because it wasn't like a one-time smash of the racket. Like it was like he just obliterated, like boom, boom, boom. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it's it's a luxury to be able to smash a racket like that.
yeah.
But
Well, speaking of throwing fits on the court, Nishioka threw an absolute temper tantrum against Hurkacz here. He was launching balls into the crowd. He got a point penalty, and then he went on to not try. Like when Hurkacz served out the match, Nishioka just didn't even attempt to hit the ball. I thought
yeah,
that was pretty immature on his part.
I mean, one might say it's Kyrgios-esque. Uh,
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things where like, yeah, I agree. It's immature, but it's also something that it's not like it's a completely new thing. Like players, when they get in a bad mood, they do stuff like that. And
Hmm.
I think, like I said, Kyrgios is a great example of a guy that when he got in his head, sometimes he just didn't want to be on the court anymore.
Yeah. And I think there are two types of anger issues, if you want to call them, when you act like this. It's like, okay, you're mad at the ref for making a bad call, or you're just mad at yourself. And this falls into the mad at yourself part where you're just so done. Like you're playing like shit. You want the match to be over and you're just not going to try anymore. You're like, whatever. I checked out of this match 3 games ago. Like, let's just move on. Let's get this
Yeah.
over with.
And I do think there is a level of like class when you
Mm-hmm.
are willing to play out a match like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
a match that comes to mind is I'm pretty sure in the 2017 Wimbledon final, Cilic got injured in the second set.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he could have like retired from the match, but he instead was like, hey, I'm just going to play it out the rest of the way. He didn't really have great mobility for the remainder of the match, but he did play it out all the way to the end so that they could have a final point and it wouldn't end in some weird way where Cilic is like, hey, I'm retiring. And then Federer's like, oh, I won the match. He actually got to hit the last ball and win the last point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. That's classy.
But already, you ready to move on to the round of 16?
Yeah. This was also a dramatic round as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think I had the story of the tournament in this round.
I know. I know. Draper FAA.
Yeah.
Do you want to just kind of describe it real quick?
Yeah. So it was match point for Draper, and FAA hit a ball. It was low. Draper kind of scooped down to reach for it, and it was a weird hit. And in the moment, it looked a little strange. Comes over the net, tips off the net, I think, even,
Mm-hmm.
and double bounce. And FAA is standing there like, what? Was there no call on that? And the chair umpire says, game, set, match, Draper. And FAA is like, what are you talking about? You're kidding me. And everyone, I was kind of like watching it in the moment, like, what's
Mm-hmm.
he talking about? But then he goes, hey, he clearly hit that ball off the ground. Like I could see it happen. And Draper was like, hey, I don't know what happened in the moment, to be honest. Like, if you can show me a replay where it hit off the ground, I'll like replay it or whatever. But I can't see what happened. And I think that's true. Like, it's really hard in the moment, like when something like that happens and it hits off your racket weird. You can't always tell if it hit off the ground. Maybe he could and he was just lying, but it seemed like he was relatively genuine about it.
Mm-hmm.
But FAA goes up to the umpire and he goes, hey, we got to replay this. Like, this is match point, and he hit the ball off the ground.
Yeah.
And they bring out the supervisor, the chairperson just says, hey, no, like I didn't see that. And they're not allowed to see the replay. And Djokovic actually tweeted about it after, and he said, hey, it's ridiculous that we at home can watch this and see that the ball is hit off the ground, but there's no access to this for the players that are actually in the moment and are dealing with this. I think it's insane that that's how that was handled, that they can't go back and replay it. They have to change the rules on this. But I do think that FA handled the whole situation with class. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
scream at the ref. He was pretty reasonable. He was talking to him. He was having discussion about it. And even though the ref made a kind of ridiculous call, I think,
Kind
I
of.
think he handled it pretty well.
Yeah. I saw a couple other tweets from players. So the first one was from Shapovalov. He was more so going after the ref for the missed call, putting like clown and then circus, because this was the same ref that defaulted in Washington, D.C. And then Nick Kyrgios actually put on a tweet as well, kind of going after Jack, saying like, Jack, mate, come on, like, you know where you hit the ball, you can feel it. You've played tennis long enough to know you shanked it right into the ground. But I think it would have been more obvious if the ball didn't hit the net cord, because you would have been able to see the spin on it.
Yeah. I mean, it was a weird situation. I mean, I don't know if I would ever. I mean, it's tough to call out a guy like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a really aggressive accusation, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Kyrgios is just saying, hey, Draper, you're cheating. That's
Yeah.
what he's saying. If you
Yeah.
break it down, he's saying, hey, Draper, you're cheating right now.
I think
It's like,
Draper felt the pressure. It was match point, and he even said, if I see it, I'll replay the point. He didn't say I will concede the point, because he should have. I think he was like, this is a testament of him kind of being nervous about possibly losing the match. Like at this point, Draper was more so worried about winning or losing the match than playing by the rules.
I mean, I also think this, like, one part of this is we forget like I was talking about earlier, that there is sort of a financial aspect to this,
Hmm.
which is crazy because it's a game. But like Draper, I mean, in the end, like Draper gets paid an extra, like some tens of thousands of dollars for
Yeah.
winning this match.
Yeah.
Is he inclined to just say, hey, I'm going to risk that when I've already been given it pretty much?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because that could impact your mental game too, and for the rest of the match. Because we were talking about having those match points and then not executing, and then like an hour and a half you're still playing. It's like you're thinking, "Oh, I could have won the match. The match was won, and then I have to go back." But
Yeah. I mean, it's also one of those things where like I said in the past, you play the call. It's like
mhm,
Draper isn't forced. Like Draper could have said, "No, I won't replay it. I've been given the point."
yeah,
He it would have been a little bit less classy of him, but he could have just said, "No, no,
yeah,
match is over. See ya."
yeah. I mean,
And
essentially, that's what he did.
he just I think he didn't side with the ref.
You're right. He
He
just
could have
said, "This
sided
is the
with the
call."
ref and said, "No, no, I hit it clean."
Yeah, yeah,
And he instead kind of withdrew from it and said, "Hey, it's not my decision," which it isn't really his decision.
hmm. You're right. I think
So,
either way, like this, I love Draper as a player, so I do hope this kind of blows by and it doesn't really leave like a nasty taste in people's mouths about him being quote unquote a cheater. Because I don't think he's a cheater. I just think people expected him to handle it a different way that he did. But
yeah. I mean,
life goes on, you know.
I don't think people will
People,
remember it. I mean, there's that
I hope
really
he,
famous one of like Federer. You've seen that video where Federer's
yeah.
like, "Oh,
Oh
that guy
yeah.
he hit it off the ground." I don't remember
Yeah.
who he was playing against.
Yeah. True. True.
I just remember the situation. So we may remember that FAA had this situation. Maybe we won't even remember that it was Draper he was playing against.
Yep. Yep. Moving on though, I think Sinner gets a much needed walkover in this round just because of how fragile his hip has been. And I think this extra rest actually helped a lot for the rest of the tournament. And Jordan Thompson was the one who withdrew, which he had a rib injury, which I'm kind of confused about in tennis. It must have been some kind of twisting ligament thing because you're not physically getting hit in the ribs.
Yeah, I mean, I know you have like what's it called, like intra bone muscle,
Intercostal.
yeah, intracostal muscle in your
Yeah.
ribs. So that's probably what it was. I doubt it was like he
He's like
shattered his
fractured rib,
rib. Yeah, not a football
punctured
injury.
lung.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, but then another big match from this round was Tiafoe versus Lehecka. This was this was the match that I was kind of referencing when I talked about the whole match point thing,
Hmm.
because Tiafoe really displayed in this match an impressive mentality to stay locked in with the amount of missed match point chances he had. Like in the second set tiebreak, he was already up a set. He had 3 match point opportunities. Then in the third set, he had another match point when he was receiving at 5-2. Then he had the chance to serve out the match and couldn't at 5-3. So he didn't convert all of those. And then he gets into the tiebreak, doesn't even convert his first match point in the tiebreak before he ends up winning the match. So the fact that he was able to deal with all of those match points, especially the ones in the second set tiebreak where he could have won the match and then has to go on and play another full set, like
Hmm.
that's really difficult to do. And I think it was impressive that he was able to get it done anyway.
Yeah, I wonder if how like if there's a dangerous aspect of playing someone who had just had a big win against Medvedev. If he's thinking like, oh shit, this guy beat Medvedev, he's kind of on my toes here, and then being able to overcome that, or if you're just not even thinking about that. I feel like you can't. Like if you
Uh,
do, you're already beat
Yeah,
if you do that.
I think you have to play the player, not who they just beat.
Hmm.
Like you can't say I'm beating Lehecka, who just beat Medvedev. It's like I'm going to play Medvedev.
Hmm. Yeah.
It you have to say, hey, I'm playing Lehecka. What's my matchup against him? What's he going to try to do? Because every matchup is different. Like
Hmm.
Tiafoe plays Lehecka completely differently than Medvedev
Hmm.
does.
Yeah. But once again, Tiafo keeps rolling.
Yeah, an impressive run already, I think, because while like
Anything
he had a
past the second
couple.
round would be
I feel like
impressive
the thing
for
with
him.
Tiafoe is like he has had some decent results. Like he played well in DC.
Hmm.
He played well in Houston earlier in the year. I feel like he's had a couple decent results. I mean, he had that close match with Alcaraz at Wimbledon. So he's had some fine results. Like he's played decently. Obviously, he doesn't have any like big title wins yet, but I do think that it's like it's just the inconsistency. Like you don't know what to expect from him from tournament to tournament. It's almost like Rublev in a
Hmm.
way where you're like, yeah, in this tournament he played very well, and in the next tournament he lost in the first round. You're like, dude, where's the consistency?
Yeah, I know. But how about on to the quarters?
Sounds good. Yeah. So big matchup here was Sinner versus Rublev. I mean, rematch of last week where Rublev obviously won, and it looked like he might get it done again there for a second. Took the first set and then nearly forced a tiebreaker in the second set. And as we know, anything could happen in a breaker. So that could have been a big opportunity for him to close out the match. Instead, Sinner breaks him right at the end of the second set, goes on to take it in the third. But a good match overall. And I think it's an interesting matchup to watch in the future because it seems like Rublev plays Sinner pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. And just kind of going off what you were saying about anything could happen in the tiebreak, especially when you have the momentum going in too. So that was scary. But then once the third set came around, I think Sinner broke him first two service games. So from that moment on, it's just like, all right, Sinner smooth sailing to the end of the match.
Mm.
Like I think it goes to show Rublev couldn't really handle all that pressure. Where he once he lost that second set, he just kind of did his classic implosion.
Yeah, once the pressure was off Sinner kind of and onto him.
Exactly. But yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully we see a or a better rivalry in the future.
100%, 100%. Um,
Yeah.
but then speaking of Tiafo again, he played Hurkacz and Hurkacz ended up retiring. That was a lucky break for him.
Yeah, yeah. You think, okay, Hurkacz retiring, this maybe has something to do with his knee. It's kind of scary, but it was a calf injury and it didn't look too serious. I think they're just trying not to push or risk anything before the US Open, which makes sense. Um, I do think this possibly could have to do with his meniscus, though, because there could be some kind of overcompensation for it. You know, how when one part of your body gets injured, the other parts of your body start working extra hard. So hopefully this is nothing serious. He rests up because I think he could be not a favorite to win, but he could have a good run at the U.S. Open if healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I feel like when you see a guy like recovering from one injury and then they get injured somewhere else, it's like, especially when it's like somewhere else, and like if he
Yeah.
hurt his tricep, you wouldn't be like, I think he's
Uh-huh.
compensating for his knee.
Yeah.
But when it's like he's compensating for his knee and his calf gets injured, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Smart move to just not even test it.
100%. But then the funny thing about this round, there was a serve fest outside of the Hurkacz match actually with Shelton and Zverev. I mean, it was a close match, but I feel like I had confidence in Zverev to win this one,
Hmm.
even when Shelton had the first set.
I was gonna say, I think Zverev has really established himself as a heavy favorite, and Shelton has kind of established himself as not that established, like where he has big point potential, but is not gonna necessarily come through every time against a top player.
Yeah, I agree. I think Shelton has that. He's so explosive, but it's also
Hmm.
like if he's forced into these long matches where there's a lot of ground strokes with a really elite guy like Zverev, he's
Hmm.
probably not going to be able to get through him. I mean, then again, he does it sometimes, but not super consistently.
Yeah, and then I also think that Zverev has somewhat of an advantage in a rally because if they're going, say, Shelton's stronger shot is his forehand. His forehand to Zverev's backhand. Zverev's backhand is one of the best on tour, and so it's essentially like he's hitting a forehand to his forehand. Like he lasers that thing back there. So I think it's consistent too. It's not like Shelton can kind of like pick apart his backhand, it's like, all right, I have to attack somewhere else because I can't attack his backhand on my forehand.
Yeah, harder to find weaknesses on Zverev.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Semis, let's
Yeah,
hop in.
sounds good. And so just FYI, this is where we're going to be ending the recap portion because we're actually recording this before the final happens because Erik won't be here later, but I will be giving an update after the final, kind of recapping what my thoughts and notes were. But before we get into that and the final, let's just give a recap of these semis. And speaking on the semis, these are also, I think, going to just be our matches of the week because I feel like it was really tough for us to choose between these two because these were pretty incredible matches. And so that we don't have to really cover them in segments. We can cover them now. First up, though, was Sinner and Zverev. So this matchup was exciting because it was their first meeting of this year. And interestingly, the last four actually went to Zverev, with the previous meeting being at the US Open last year. So we knew it was going to be a great matchup going in because these two guys have been two of the consistently best guys on tour this year. And a testament to that consistency is that Zverev is actually almost above Alcaraz in the year-to-date rankings, despite Alcaraz having won 2 Grand Slams. So Zverev is only 250 points behind him, whereas the gap from them to Sinner is over 1,000, just for reference. So both of them came out playing great, really tight back and forth. Zverev got a break early, couldn't serve it out in the first set, and then ended up losing it in a tiebreak. Super tight tiebreak, was 11-9 for Sinner. And then in that second set, also back and forth, he ended up snatching a break at 5-6 to take the second set. And then in the third, once again, real tight, no real break chances for either guy. But when they did end up getting to that match tiebreak, Sinner did deliver there. So really just an intense match, and they delivered on the how hyped the matchup was.
Yeah, fantastic match. I love these, right? Because, we didn't have this in Canada. We now have Zverev Sinner in a semifinal. Like, that's how a Masters 1000 semifinal should go. And honestly, when I think of Zverev playing, his serve is one of his strongest points of his game, but it's also the weakest. Like, it let him down in that tiebreaker. He double faulted. Like, how do you double fault in that first set tiebreaker? And then he went on. He actually had a set point in the tiebreaker. So it goes to show, like, even if he didn't double fault, he could have easily won that set in the breaker.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree about the serve because, like you said, when it's on, like, I remember watching a match earlier in the year. I think the match against Dimitrov that Dimitrov ended up winning, but Zverev's serve was so on point in that match. It was the only reason he was in that match at all, because Dimitrov was playing incredible. But every time Zverev served, it was like if he hit his serve in, that was just his point.
Yeah, I think he's the only person that could win a match double faulting like 8 times in a match.
Yeah,
and imagine
exactly.
if he just cuts those down, how many more wins he can have, because this match came down to points.
Yeah, few points here and there, or what determined the match. And then, but like you're saying, this is kind of what you expect from Masters 1000, to 1-3 seed. On the other side, we have two guys we definitely did not expect to see. Obviously, Rune hadn't been playing terrible, but like he hadn't played to the level where I expected to see him in a Masters 1000 semifinal. And Tiafoe, exact same thing, up and down year, but did not think he'd be in this position after a round 1 loss last week.
Yeah, these are, on the other half, 2 guys I would have never expected. I mean, like you said, Rune, I kind of expect him more than Tiafoe because he has that capability, where Tiafoe is more up and down. I'm happy to see it because I love both players, and I do think despite their struggles, like they haven't peaked and they're not on their way down. Like, they're in fact still forces to be reckoned with. I do think either one, though, will have a tough time with Sinner, like, regardless. I don't know. Who do you think has a better shot of beating Sinner?
I don't know. I mean, I know Rune has a very high level ability. The funny thing about this match, though, was just watching it, like, compared to the Zverev Sinner match, I felt
Hmm.
like Zverev and Sinner played much harder, flatter shots
Hmm.
versus Rune and Tiafoe were just kind of spinning the ball back and forth. And then the winners they would produce would be more like a very intense angle
Hmm.
versus Sinner and Zverev were almost able to hit the ball past each other.
Yeah, that's a good analysis. That Sinners Zverev match was awesome just because of how hard they were hitting the ball. Like those points were fantastic. And then not to say that Tiafoe's Rune wasn't, but yeah, just different style. And I like that. It's two contrasting styles. You have two semifinal matches, two different styles.
Yeah, I don't know if
What do you
Tiafoe's
prefer?
style is going to work as effectively though against Sinner.
Hmm. Is there one that you prefer to watch?
I mean, with that spinny style, it doesn't I feel like look as nice on TV, to be
Hmm.
honest. Because
Yeah.
when you see Sinner and Zverev both sitting like 3 feet behind the baseline, but blasting the ball back and
Hmm.
forth to each other, you can tell the pace of the play.
Yeah.
Versus Tiafoe and Rune, they were like spinning the ball into like mid depth, so it
Hmm.
didn't look like they were hitting as hard or like it didn't look as intense as it did in the other match.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I,
definitely.
I guess in terms of like as a viewer, I do like seeing those hard shots, but it's also fun to see when someone can produce very interesting angles like Tiafoe is able to sometimes.
For sure. And then you also, I feel like, had a lot more net play in the Rune Tiafoe match too. Like there was one point that came to mind. It was a 17 shot rally where Rune was just up at the net getting blasted at him. And it was one of those where the shot was so hard you couldn't get a nice like square volley on it. You're pretty much just sticking your racket out and hoping for the best. And he really made Tiafoe work for that point. And then he even had a an overhead backhand that Tiafoe just kind of smashed at him, but then Rune ended up hitting in the net. But just great point. I think that was like the highlight of the match for me. Like two
Yeah,
workhorses going at it.
100%. There were some weird lobs though in these semifinals. Like I know Sinner, I think, missed an overhead at one point on
Hmm.
a critical point, and then I know Zverev also like had an overhead and chose not to go for like a falling back overhead and instead went for the tweener.
Yeah,
It
that was in
was
the breaker,
yeah, it
right?
was
Yeah.
pretty wild like to see those situations happen because it's funny that the overhead smash is such a critical part of the game because you're expected to make it every single time. And I feel like
Hmm.
it's kind of underappreciated probably in training.
Yeah, definitely. It's also like the shot selection too, that a player in the moment what they decide to do, and then after they're probably beating themselves up like you freaking idiot, why didn't you just do that? Like it's something you need to practice over and over again for it to become muscle memory, so you don't even need to think when it happens or when you're in that situation.
100%. But then also just breaking down this Rune versus Tiafoe match, what went on with that like lopsided fashion in which the first two sets went? Because I feel like that's happened to Rune a couple times now. Like it happened in the first round with Berrettini, but
Hmm.
like Rune, one of the first two sets, he's pretty decently ahead. I mean, I don't think he clobbered Tiafoe in that. It was what 6-4, but
Yeah.
then in the next set, it's like 1-6, and you're like, what happened to make this mental lapse here, where all of a sudden we're just in a third set tiebreak? I think it was like a 25-minute set. I
Hmm.
don't know whether it's just a mental lapse or whether Rune like just very easily gives up in these sets. He's like, fine, we'll go to a third. I feel
I
like
think
that's
it's that.
not the mindset you want to have. Like you'd much rather be able to win the match in two sets and just lock in and be done with it.
I agree with you, but I do think that's probably where it's coming from. He's like, whatever, this set's lost. Let's on move on to the next.
Yeah, but it didn't work out for him in this one though, because I mean
Nope.
he went up in that third set, but then just kind of had that weird fall apart. I mean, he served for the match at 5-3, gets broken, and in that game, Tiafoe did get a lucky tip off the net. I think it was
Oh,
at
I know.
love 30.
I know.
He immediately comes out and jumps all over Tiafoe's serve, goes up 40-50 or 15-40 with Tiafoe serving. And then Tiafoe gets a second lucky tip off the net on a match point. and then is able to produce a big serve on the second match point. And I think from that point, Rune lost a little bit of his control of the match because, like, the last point of that game was a great example. Like, they were just in a normal rally, and Tiafoe or Rune just tried to switch with his backhand, go from cross court to down the line, and just put it like a foot and a half wide.
Yeah.
And it was like, you didn't need to go for that at that point, but he was just like desperate because he wanted to be able to take some control back, and just didn't work out for him in the end. But that it was just so unlucky for him to get those tips off the net for Tiafoe. I mean, literally was 2 inches away from winning the match.
I know you got a feel for him there because you could just see it, the like disappointment on his face too. It's one of those really,
Yeah, he's
and
just
it's
like, no way that just happened.
yeah, yeah. And I didn't really see an apology from Tiafoe. I saw like on one of them, like maybe some like quick, but I feel like in that scenario, you need to be very obvious about it. Like maybe even like make sure you make eye contact with the person and like give the little wave because
Yeah.
that's
And it's
that's
one of those
tough,
things
man.
where it's like, like, yes, it's not that really big of a deal. Like, obviously, the other person knows that you're happy that happened, but it's like like we've talked a lot about sort of like class and respect in this
Yeah,
podcast, and like
yeah.
it's one of those things. It's like, Tiafoe, you're saying, "Hey, man, I got lucky." That's
Hmm.
all it's saying. It's not saying, "Hey, you're not actually sorry that happened. You're actually
Yeah,
happy it happened."
yeah,
But you're just saying to the other person, "Hey, man, I got lucky," and
yeah.
you're admitting that, and then they can go, "Okay, yeah, you did."
Uh-huh.
But
Exactly.
then, like, not doing that is just like a complete disrespect for your opponent, I feel like.
I agree. I agree. And you can even do what Alcaraz did in the French Open final with Zverev. Remember, he had that lucky net cord. Zverev looked at him. Alcaraz apologized, and then right when Zverev turned around, he just like
Yeah,
let out a
celebrated.
massive fist bump
Yeah,
celebration.
that's honestly, that's completely fine in my book because he
Yeah.
did what was required of him,
Uh-huh.
and he said the mini apology, and then he
Hmm.
celebrated because he won the point. He's happy he won the point,
Yeah.
but it's also the respect to the opponent, which Tiafoe just didn't show.
I know. And I think it's partially the mental chess aspect of tennis. Like Tiafoe purposely didn't do it to piss Rune off because he knows how fragile Rune is.
Probably true.
Yeah.
But anyway, since
Um,
the final hasn't happened yet, let's kind of preview it here with Sinner and Tiafoe. So first up, the head-to-head between these two guys, 3-1 for Sinner, including their most recent meeting. And it's just interesting because it's the back-to-back weeks, lopsided finals in terms of ranking. Like, last week it was Rublev Popyrin, this week it's Sinner and Tiafoe. I mean, my question here is like, is it more lopsided between Rublev and Popyrin or between Sinner and Tiafoe? Because in terms of ranking position, it was Rublev and Popyrin because it was like 60 versus 8,
mhm. Yeah.
like before the tournament, like going in.
Hmm.
Whereas here it's like 30 versus 1. So it's more for that one. But in terms of like the ranking points, it was way more this week because Rublev Popyrin before the final, the difference was only like 3,300 ranking points.
Hmm.
But because of Sinner is the number one guy in the world, it's like 7,000 ranking points between Tiafoe and Sinner.
Yeah, that's a great question or a great discussion point because I do think that there's a lot more um, lopsidedness in this final, Sinner Tiafoe, not only because of the ranking points, but also because of the fact, like, yeah, number one, and then there's such a clear distinction of skill level from like one, two, three, let's say like Alcaraz, Sinner, Djokovic, to the rest of the players. So I think you have to account for that as well. Whereas Rublev and Popyrin, you had disparity, but you also had a struggling Rublev, and Rublev is not as like good as a Sinner, whereas like the difference between Sinner and Rublev is very large. Whereas maybe between like Popyrin and Rublev, it's not as big. I don't know. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think the perspective that has to be taken is kind of like if it was Djokovic like if it was Djokovic in 2018 playing a guy that was 25 in the world, you'd be like, hey, this is a crazy matchup. Versus if it was Dimitrov in 2016 or something in a final, like Dimitrov versus Kyrgios, for example, that 2017 Cincinnati Finals, a great example. Like, would that be more of a separation than if it was like Djokovic versus the 25 guy in the world? No, the Djokovic one would be much more of a separation because you're talking about the best guy in the world versus a guy that's just inside the top 25 versus two guys where you're like, okay, either this could kind of go either way. Not to say that Kyrgios and Popyrin were at the same level at that point, but that's kind of the idea. And I think that's where the ranking point kind of shows how far the separation is.
Yeah, exactly. Like any given day, Popyrin could clearly beat Rublev, whereas any given day, I mean, Tiafoe could beat Sinner, but it's a lot less likely. Like
I feel like it's
right?
one of the, exactly. That was exactly where I was going to go. Is like if they were to play 10 times, you would probably expect Rublev to win like 7 or 8 out of 10.
That's a lot, even, I think.
Maybe, but I'd say 7 or 8 out of 10 against Popyrin would be my feeling. In like because I think if Popyrin would have to be really on point to beat him, like he was in this tournament. But then if you're talking Sinner versus Tiafoe, you're probably thinking he's beating him, like especially where they are right now in their careers. You'd think they beat him 9 or 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, I would say 8 or 9, and then 6 or 7 for Popyrin.
Yeah, but it's all the same idea.
Right.
But anyway, I'll add my my post match analysis after this. But for now, let's hop into segments.
Yeah, way to hold it down for us. Thank you, Aidan.
So, what's new in tennis? What'd you see this week?
Dude, Nick Kyrgios is going to be coming back. He's got his UTS exhibition tournament next week in New York. So UTS is the Universal Tennis
Showdown.
Showdown, exactly. So it's not like ATP sanctioned or anything, but he's using this tournament to assess his physical condition. He wants to come back and play ATP tournaments, but he's been plagued with injuries for the last 2 years. His last singles match was back in 2022 in Japan. He had to withdraw before his match against Fritz. And in that, he had first an ankle injury to start off, and then he had a knee injury in Australia right before the Australian Open. And then he actually injured his foot in an armed robbery incident this past summer. Yeah, I know. I didn't even hear about this until recently, which prevented him from playing the French Open. And then he had plans of coming back and playing Wimbledon, but in the lead-up practice, he tore a ligament in his wrist. So he's been just devastated by injury. He's kind of older now too, so he wants to come back. Not sure if he is. This will be a great opportunity to see him, see his condition. And I feel like, so he's going to be playing Casper Ruud, which I feel like is kind of a good opponent to come back to because it's still someone who's good and respectable, but it's not someone who's in the best shape of their career, top form. Like it's kind of a struggling Casper Ruud.
Yeah, I get that, but also it's like Casper Ruud has still been playing as a top 10 player in the world, versus a guy that hasn't played in 2 years. So
Kyrgios has that X factor. Like he's one of those guys that despite his ranking or how long he sits out, like you got to realize he's got the potential to beat anyone. Like he has that skill set.
Yeah, I mean, I think before the injury, he had that skill set. Before this hiatus, I think we have to wait before we make that analysis though about whether he's still the same guy.
Yeah, this will be interesting. So we'll report on it too after it happens.
100%.
I'm going to be tuning. I usually would never watch a UTS match, but because this is Kyrgios coming back and first time in 2 years, gonna have to check it out.
100%.
How about you, man? What did you see this week?
I saw that Sinner is the first guy to statistically qualify for Turin. So year-end finals, obviously pretty cool accomplishment. And last year he made the final, didn't win it, but it's cool to see that he's already qualified in August. And I saw someone say about it that they were kind of surprised he didn't do it earlier. And I think that's because of how hot he started the year. Like he started the year won what, like 30 matches and lost like 2 or something.
Yeah, it was insane.
Pretty insane start to the year. And he's slowed down a bit since then, but like he still won in Hull. And he may win today. I think. I mean, he's the big favorite. And so while he has slowed down slightly, it's cool to see that he's done it. My big question is like, will Djokovic qualify? Because I think it depends entirely on his US Open performance. Like if he does well at the US Open, he probably just qualifies straight from that. But if he doesn't, does he play in that East Asia swing after the US Open? Like, I don't know if he'll have enough points to make it if he doesn't, depending on how he does in the US Open.
Yeah, I was gonna say because the U.S. Open, he's gonna be defending a lot of points too. So if
Yeah,
that doesn't,
but the
right?
Turin ranking isn't impacted by that because
Oh,
it's
it's
year
on
to
a
date.
year. Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So yeah, his
Yeah,
actual ranking will go down probably, or I mean, it will be
right,
impacted by how he
right.
does. But like in the race to Turin, like he's I think number 7 right now
7.
for the year to date,
Hmm.
and so it's like he's right on that edge there.
Yeah, and this is a tournament too. Maybe he just decides to forego. He's like, I've done everything I can in I've literally done everything I can in my career. I'll let the young guys have this one and I'll just play slams.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
he's
I
not
think
too
he
worried.
probably, I don't think he can statistically, I mean, maybe it's possible, but I don't think he can really be the year end number 1 at this point. It would be very
Yeah,
difficult, I think. Sinner would have to choke really hard.
yeah. What about Alcaraz? Is he
I think Alcaraz is
in
also above
contention?
him.
No.
Yeah. So I don't think that Djokovic is really in position to be year end number 1 again.
Yeah,
But I still think he may want to win the year end finals if he gets the chance.
yeah. Just off the top of your head, do you know if Fritz and Tommy Paul are
Fritz, I
pitching?
want to say, is number 9 in the year to date rankings. And I think
Uh-huh.
Tommy's like number 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotta get an American up there.
Yeah. I mean, it's the top 8 in the world. It's a tough competition. I mean,
Uh-huh.
like someone like Rune who made it last year isn't even close, I don't think.
Yeah. Are there any first timers?
I mean, off the top of my head, I want to say that it's Sinner, Alcaraz, Zverev, Medvedev. I think Rublev is in there at like 7.
Yeah.
Uh, mm, and I can't think. Rude,
Yeah.
maybe. I'm not sure. Tsitsipas, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody first time.
I
Maybe
wonder when we'll
Herkoch.
start
Maybe
seeing.
Herkoch. Or actually, no, Deminar. Deminar, I think, is number 7 or number 8 right
Oh,
now.
nice. Nice.
So he could be a first time,
Nice.
but we'll see. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah. All right. Bet of the
And
week.
yeah. What did you go for this week?
I'm taking Baez plus 105 over Chorich. So Baez has a 2-0 head-to-head record against him. And people may think of Baez as a clay rat. And I was actually surprised he had positive odds over George, but he's beaten him in Winston-Salem this exact tournament a year ago and US Open, both on hard courts. So I feel like, we're at that stage in the year where I'm either going to be betting on the final, which I didn't love any of the lines there, or I'm betting Winston-Salem. And I think this was my best option.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if he's beaten him twice on hard, like I'm
Yeah,
kind
I
of
like to
surprised
go.
that
I was gonna
he's
say I
got the
like to go
positive
for
odds.
the I like to go for the matchups. Like he clearly has some kind of matchup advantage, and that with positive odds, I just it's a good bet in my.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
What about you?
I'm going for the crazy parlay this week to get
Uh-oh.
the positive odds because I wanted to bet on
Degen
the final.
status.
So it's a plus 135. Not crazy underdog odds for a 3-leg parlay, but
Uh-huh.
Sinner to win.
Okay.
I want Sinner to break serve first and for there to be no tie breaks in the match. So I don't think the match is going to be particularly close. I would be surprised if Tiafoe broke him first.
Uh-huh.
And I would be less surprised if there's a tiebreak. That's kind of the one I'm most worried about.
Mhm.
But now probably Sinner's going to the other two are going to work and Sinner's going to lose. But that's my feeling. I think Sinner's going to beat him pretty handily.
Yeah, I like that. I think if you're gonna get some action on the final, this would be the best way to do it. Because
100%.
otherwise your risk profile is just it's not worth it to just bet
Exactly.
straight up for Sinner.
Exactly. I feel like he's such a massive favorite. It doesn't
So there
doesn't
wasn't
make
anything
sense.
else you could throw in there to get it even crazier.
Nothing I felt like was like super reasonable.
Yeah, that's fair. I might ride this one out with you. I like it.
Mm. And then match of the week, like we already talked about, we went with the semifinals there, but we'll let you know how the final goes, and yeah, I'll update you when that happens. Hello again. So I'm back after the match has concluded, and just want to give some of my notes and thoughts that I took from during the match. I got my notes right here. Just starting us off, very slow start for Sinner. Obviously, he nearly got broken in that first game, which would have kind of screwed my bet of the week, but ended up pulling it back out of the fire and ended up kind of staying on serve for most of that first set. My early takeaway for Tiafoe was just his serve was great. I definitely didn't give it enough credit. It kind of seems like it just fits with that American style of play, having a big serve, big forehand, and Tiafoe kind of embodied that today. But he did obviously have some difficulty with Sinner today. One thing that I also did notice was both of them were very wild today. Especially Sinner, I feel like we kind of know him for having a very strong, consistent game. And he did have that as the match went on, but he came out there early and was missing a lot of shots that you kind of expect him to hit, a lot of unforced errors. And it seemed like it was pretty clear that Tiafoe was playing to not get into a neutral game. It seemed like Tiafoe's whole strategy was keep pressure when I have it or just try to end points as early as possible, because every time they got into a long rally, it did seem like it was going Sinner's way. Tiafoe had some early break opportunities, like I mentioned. Sinner only really had one in that first set, and it was actually at 6-5, so he did have a chance to break and win the set, which would have kept my bet parlay alive. He didn't get it done, but I think Tiafoe kind of stepped up to the plate. He delivered a couple booming forehands there to stay in the set and force it to a tiebreak. Turned out in the tiebreak, he just wasn't up to par. But the tiebreak was very interesting to watch. I mean, they both produced some pretty great, strong shots, especially Sinner. I mean, the ability of Sinner to just produce those marvelous forehands, whether it was up the line or cross court or with just surprising power from being on the run, was very impressive. But honestly, the same thing with Tiafoe. Tiafoe's ability to make a good shot while in not necessarily the strongest position was good. It just wasn't quite as good as Sinner's. And after Sinner kind of won that tiebreak, I did feel like he did have the advantage. It seemed like he was able to lock more in those rallies. I mean, one thing I noticed was in those neutral rallies, it seemed like both of them were kind of just trying to turn it up with every single shot. And Sinner was just able to turn that screw a little bit more and get it to a point where Tiafoe either was overpowered or he tried a shot that was maybe a weaker. He did kind of go for what the commentator called this bunch shot, where he would switch to a slice grip, and it wasn't really a drop shot. It was almost just like push it back. I feel like that's something that isn't super effective in his game. Yes, it does give your opponent a weird shot to deal with, but it kind of puts you on the back foot if your opponent is able to deal with it successfully, as Sinner was most of the time. But like I said, as they went into that second set, it did seem like Sinner kind of started to get the momentum, broke early in that second set, and then at 3-1 they had probably the game of the match. I mean, I feel like it stood out very much. This 10-minute game, back and forth. Both of them had chances, though, to take this game, and it seemed like they were both just a little bit wild. I don't know whether it was nerves or just a lot of fatigue from playing a lot, but both of them just were missing shots. One shot that stands out was just a pickup volley that Tiafoe just pushed wide, and it didn't seem like that difficult of a shot for him, but I don't know. It just seemed like both of them weren't necessarily delivering to their expectations. In the end, though, Sinner won it with a great shot up the line to close it out, and that kind of seemed to slam the door shut on the match overall. Sinner went on to win the next 7 points in a row, and he actually got 3 match points that Tiafoe was able to defend, survived one. He won 5 points in a row and held on to his serve, but Sinner was able to stay composed. He was still up 5-2 and ended up coming out and serving 4 and winning 4 points and closing out the match, and had a very kind of reserved response when he won the match. His celebration just kind of put his hands in the air. No loud yell, just kind of like, yes, I did it. This was a little bit of what I expected, but I'm happy with it. Unlike someone like an Alcaraz or someone like that where you would expect a big outpouring of emotion. But those are my thoughts, my notes on the final, and yeah, till next time.
All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.